late today. Not exactly sure what's going on with Facebook, but it does seem like Facebook is down. Um, and it's I'm going to see if Mr. Christopher is available. And let me see if I can get Mr. Scott here also. Anyway, as I was saying, I was on Saturday with uh, the ladies and gentlemen from Minneapolis, and I wanted to. Uh, Hello, sir. I'm doing fine. How are you?
Hey, this will not let me. When I go to StreamYard, when I go to this link you sent me,
I'm I, I'm going to send you another one right now. Try this one. Let's see.
yeah, that other link takes me somewhere everywhere. It doesn't.
Uh, I don't know. Let me. I'm going to send you another one. Give me 1 second, okay?
All right.
All right. Let's see. I know we're having a problem because there's been Facebook's been out all day, so okay, I'm gonna message you this one right now. Don't quite understand what's going on here. Okay, I see Miss Sims is in the building.
Greetings.
Miss Sims, how are you
I'm present and accounted for. How's that?
doing? I hear you. I hear you. I'm trying to get Mr. Christopher in right now. He seemed to have.
Sure. I'll wait. No problem.
How are things in your fair city tonight? I know it's hot and humid here.
Well, I haven't ventured out yet from my covert cave a lot. So I usually get the temperature when my daughter comes in from work and she'll say, "It's too hot in here." "Oh, it's cold. Close the window." So, but I think it's fairly autumn like weather here.
Okay. And how have things been as far as I know the last time I was talking with the people in your town, there had been an abnormal amount of shootings as usual. I think something like seven heard, 150 shots fired. How are things within the community itself?
Well, in that, in the regard that you just spoke of, I'm not on the front line of keeping up with the daily ongoing things in that area because I know a lot of people are doing that. I'm just a retired, as of August, faith based community organizer. And so my interests are still with the community, but in other aspects in terms of through all this and keeping that in mind on the back burner, I work on various things like the light uh, Blue Line extension, the light rail system come in, environmental issues, um, things along that line. Um, while at the same time, you can never just not notice what's going around you because you live. I live in the community, and there's the security issues of what's going on. So that's the aspect that I come from.
Oh, okay. All right. That's very interesting. Being a former PK, faith based. I'm sure you know what that means, preacher's kid.
Oh,
So, no,
I
no,
do, but you had. I'm glad you reminded me. My mind was searching, but yeah, I'm familiar with the
yeah.
term.
So, but hey, I've strayed way off the path, so we won't go. We won't get
All
in.
right, and I won't go down that path with you. I'll just let you go, but stay on that path or choose another path. You just, I'm glad to meet you where you are.
But one of the things that I wanted to discuss this month was the role of the black church in our community, as far as crime, educational and job disparities, as well as of course, our overall representation. And uh, being somewhat younger than I am, and once again, congratulations on your retirement. I have a lot of issues with the way that I see things in this current situation.
Hmm.
Um, and that being, I think that faith-based and religious-based organizations have become afraid to go into, uh, let's put it bluntly, the lion's den.
Okay, and so you first let's understand. Need you to understand from the beginning, from the get go, that
Yes.
I'm not much younger than you are. I'm 72
Oh,
from your era. And
okay.
so I've been in the faith based organizing probably about 20 to 30 years now. And my first introduction to organizing was through my church. I'm a member at Zion Baptist Church down here, not too far from me. Um, and I guess I started going there when I was about 30 years old. And when I started going there, there were senior people there, up front helping do the service. And now I'm the senior. I'm not, because of physical constraints, I don't attend church nearly as often as I used to. But now, in that capacity, as we're speaking of, I'm now the senior that, if I was at church, I would be, maybe leading the prayer, help taking up, doing this and doing that. And I was very active when I was in church. And so, coming from faith-based organizing and that faith-based perspective, um, the church has changed like society is, because you gotta remember to think, and a lot of people have to stop to think about it. Uh, when a lot of people refer to say church, you gotta remember there's a difference. There, the church are the people, the building that we gather in on various occasions for various things. It's just a building that houses us, but it's also called the church. But in scripture, and most folks that are, if you're familiar with it, God says and tells us that we are the church. We, the people, are the church. And that's one of the things my pastor, who's dead now, is Curtis A. Heron, always said, go out from this building. You're the church. You are the ones. And so that is one way, one various means how the church has changed age wise, and the cycle of life. So people have changed. So the people that are the church are out in the community, where the community and various things that you're speaking of have it's changed in constantly. So it's the church is a living organism, and there's the structure that we the church enter into, and so uh, we are human. We do things. We try to make the world a better place. We have failures. We have um, things that go on that people that all have faith but may not go to the building, a church building, the structure that we go into.
I understand that, and I've been kind of familiar with that part,
Hmm.
because we have become a lot more informal
Right.
than when we were kids. I mean,
Hmm.
Sunday was, get up, put on your best, da da da. Da. Nowadays, put on a pair of jeans, whatever you got. I mean, it's not quite the community
Right.
uh, feeling that it was before, and this is kind of what uh, you know. Uh, I guess one of my gripes is because when we were trying, back in our, oh, I see Mr. Christopher is here. Mr. Christopher,
Hey, how we doing? How we doing?
oh,
Good evening.
we finally got you in. I don't know if you and Miss Sims are familiar with each other or not.
I'm
No.
I'm not. I do watch Don Allen's show when I can, and I believe Mr. Christopher was one of his last guests on there that I watched.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
ma'am.
Mr. Christopher, tell us a little bit about your background now that we have you in.
Well, I'm here in great old Minneapolis, Minnesota here, and I've been here since 1990, and just I'm a reverend at Berean Missionary Baptist Church, which is pretty much in the heart of everything that's going on, all the shootings, all the killings. We're right there in the middle of everything that's going down. Um, I'm just out trying to do the best I can to try to save some of these young kids that's out here. I just pray and try to get as close to them as possibly can. I have a foundation called Shepherd's Works that my wife and I started. That we basically fed pretty much the whole neighborhood through that um, through our foundation. I'm a staunch Second Amendment advocate who fights for the rights of everybody to own a firearm. And I know that's something that you don't usually hear, especially from a black preacher. But I believe everybody has a right um, to own a firearm. And a lot of us black people have gotten away from that. We forgot about the deacons of defense, and we forgot about a lot of things when it comes to with firearms. So that's one thing that's definitely I could say I'm 110% behind. But other than that, I thank you for having me on, Mr. King. I appreciate you. I finally figured this thing out. I had to go to a different browser
Yeah,
to
okay.
forget what you didn't tell us that part. You,
Well, hey,
Yeah, that
the,
may
the,
mean he got to know himself all the
Right,
entities.
you didn't tell me that part.
yeah, well, yeah, that was one of the things that I knew that you had to use Safari, but mine, I just connect up. So I'm kind of like Don. Hey, if it works, then like, hey, like let's get
Yeah,
going.
yeah.
Uh,
And listen to Mr. Christopher. He and I have similar backgrounds. I attend Zion Baptist Church, and I'm familiar with the name of his church. I too came to Minneapolis in 1970. I'm originally from Charleston, West Virginia. My father was a coal miner. And the fellow I married he was in his senior year at Syracuse University. When he graduated, he came out here to the university to get his master's degree. And at that time, education, I saw on your paper, you talk about education. He was, he just retired from the St. Paul school system recently, 30 some years, and he's in special education. And then at that time in 1970, Minnesota was like the first or second in the nation for education. And that was one reason, one thing that drew him here. His mentor at Syracuse University, Al Sullivan, came out to the university and became a professor, and he asked Ronald to come that way also. So that's how I'm here.
See, now, I remember that one of our tests or something was named after Minnesota or Minneapolis or something in school back in the day. You had to, right?
I don't remember that.
So
There,
it was,
there may have been a test called the MMPI,
right,
the
Minnesota,
Minnesota Multi-Phase
Oh,
Inventory.
right,
And
right.
I happen to know that because in graduate school, these are the things that we had to learn,
okay,
which
all
I
right.
never really used. But
Yeah.
you know,
Well, see, once again, that that may go to the other side of my background, which I kind of lightly went over with Miss Sims, but the reason why I have everyone gathered here is because I wanted to talk specifically about the role of the Black church in communities of crime, race, and educational and job disparity. Now, these are things that we've all talked about on our various Saturday shows. Uh, Mr. Scott, for those of us out here in California and you know that don't listen to Black News Minnesota, I mean, on Saturday mornings, tell us a little bit about yourself and also about that publication you have out.
yes, I'm a 70-year resident here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, I attended schools here. I attended grade school, junior high, and high school at the Great Washburn High School, where we were state champions football my senior year. And right now I'm retired mainly from Hennepin County Child Protection, where I was a supervisor for over 20 plus years. I was the most senior supervisor in the field when I decided I had had enough and I was going to walk away from it. And I embarked on I have a nonprofit, and how this started out. My dad wrote 3 books on the Black community in Minnesota in the 1950s and the 60s and 70s. And one of the first things I did when I left work was to work with the Historical Society, and they reprinted my dad's 3 books in one volume
Oh,
called the Scott Collection.
hmm.
It's 500 pages,
Wow.
and it goes through the 50s, 60s, and 70s of Black Minnesota, kind of honing in on the Twin Cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis. And as part of that initiative, I've also been able to, and as part of our nonprofit, where I'm working with a family, the Crutchfield family. If you know anything about medicine in Minnesota, the Crutchfield family are generations of medical doctors that have been here in the Twin Cities for a number of years. We put together Minnesota's Black Community Project, a nonprofit. And with that, we did a new book, Minnesota's Black Community, the 21st Century. And in this new book, we highlighted positive accomplishments that Black people are accomplishing here in the Twin Cities that are just totally overlooked. And that book has recently won a national award from the R. Wayne Pace Human Resource Development Program. I have a nice plaque, beautiful award. The book's doing real well. We've done many, every year we do a big program at the downtown Minneapolis Library, Black History Month, and we do them ongoing. But we've had the doctors talking about the history of the Black doctors, the Dr. Browns. There's a whole history of Black accomplishment and achievement in the Twin Cities, and that's to counterpoint a lot of this negativity. And James, and one of the things I want to say too, my dad, he got up here to Minnesota because his mother had passed away when he was in high school, and her brother took care of him. But her brother was an AME minister, and her brother was sent up here to Minneapolis to pastor at St. James Church over on Snelling Avenue. in Minneapolis, if you're familiar with that. A lot of blacks used to live in that area. It's really almost borders St. Paul. And that's where he happened to meet my mother because her uncle had come here after he got out of the service. They said he got ran out of Birmingham and got into it with somebody and he left. They say he hoboed on a train. Him and his friend hoboed on a train and just came up to Minneapolis. But
Well,
that's where my mother and father happened to meet. And so this is what I do now. So the church has been a huge part of my life. My mother, she was the pianist and music director at a church called Bethesda Baptist Church for many years. It's one of the oldest. I started in the 1800s here in Minneapolis, and she, for her whole life, that's what she did. And so every Sunday, that's where I was. And then when I could drive a car, I had to pick up the ladies, the choir ladies, and take them to choir rehearsal and get through that. But I tell you what, those ladies stuck with me my whole life. My dad didn't really go to the church, anything like that. That really wasn't his, even though his uncle was the preacher. But when my dad passed, those choir ladies were in that church. And I mean, one of the ladies got up and read the obituary like she would normally do at Bethesda about my dad. And they've always treated me as, all those choir ladies have just been like my aunties. They've been close. When I got married, they come over, bring me sweet potato pies. But this is how church was then. And I think, James, you want to kind of get into how church is now and how it's reflected in our current
and how we made this transition, because it seems like we made this transition as sheep. It was kind of like a path that we were led down, and we did not question. And I think it was because of our sense of prosperity. But those are things we'll get off into later. I want to kind of address this very first question, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Christopher, Reverend Christopher. I'm sorry. Uh, and I want to know, has social media and age disparity led to the decline of today's church in our community?
I would definitely say yes. I would say because one of the reasons why the black church right now is in decline is because they do not want to change. They want to stay old fashioned. And these kids today can go on social media and pull up a Kurt Franklin service, something like a Kurt Franklin service, a Kurt Franklin song, and they can understand it, and they can understand where we're going to. Now, the church that I preach at is Old Southern Baptist. You ain't never gonna get anything other than Old Southern Baptist. Our children, our youth choir, our youth Sunday schools are depleted to the point that we don't have a youth Sunday school, to the point that we don't have a youth choir. There was a young man, and I keep forgetting his name, but he won a Stellar Award right here in Minneapolis. Javante. Javante was a member, and his mom is still a member of our church. But Javante started off as a member of Berean Missionary Baptist Church because they wouldn't let this young man do his music, and they frowned upon the type of music. He ended up going to another church, and that church used his gifts to the point that he won a Stellar Award. This young man has had two CDs at the top of the chart on the gospel album. But you can't get the old regime to understand that no, his word never changed. His word never, ever, ever changed. But we also got to understand that there's something there that has to pull people in. I'm sorry, these kids just don't want to sing the old Negro spirituals. They just do not want to do it.
I don't want to.
Right. And so now you seeing a declining in the church. Not only that, but then you got people out here on social media saying, this about church and that about church, and you need to think about this and think about that. So both of those things play a big part of why the black church just is not. I went over, matter of fact, I visited a church that I had visited when I first moved to Minneapolis, and that church was packed. I mean, when I said packed, it was packed. I just went back there this Sunday because I had to drop off some things to them. There wasn't that many people there.
Yeah.
There wasn't that many kids there. So yes, my answer to you is yes.
Mr. Scott, how do you find it? I mean, you're someone that works in child care, and I mean, there has to be some kind of link between child care, parents, faith. I mean, you have to have some type of center for in order for your family to thrive.
I agree, and I agree with the pastor. And, with my mother always being a music director at Bethesda Baptist Church, she would also go every year to the convention, the National Gospel Convention, and go to these workshops. And one of the things she always would said, if the music is good, the preaching is going to sound good. And so and when she played, a lot of times it was just her. A lot of it was just her and a piano. Every now and then they'd have an organ player. And recently, well, I guess up for the last 3 years, I was in the choir. I played the bass. I was in the Sounds of Blackness for many years. Gary Hahn is a good friend of mine. And I was part of the music ministry at Pilgrim Baptist Church, which is the oldest Baptist church in Black Belt. I think it's even older than Bethesda. I know it's the oldest one in St. Paul. And the music selection we played, I loved it because we played a lot of the new stuff. But every first Sunday, the men would do a choir. And they wanted to do gospel QCs. They wanted to do the old, but the way we played it, we had a guitar player that played with, what was that band with Jeffrey Osborne, LTD. He was our guitar player. We had an organ and keyboard people that had played all kinds of music. So when we struck up some music, I'll never forget a choir lady, her son came and sat in with the choir. And we played this one song, and I looked at him, and he was up in the choir stepping. He was up there stepping. I said, well, wait. I said, well, we're at church. He said, the music is good. I got to move. And I think that somehow we can't continue to be divisive, old and new and young. And somehow a family includes the baby on up to the oldest one. And I think that that's where we have really lost the community type of feel. And I know, James, we've talked about that. We don't really have communities like we remember growing up where you knew everybody and everybody knew you and you knew. So, but I think the church has to evolve. There's just no question about it. The kids with the video games and all the things, social media and all these things, it's a distraction. It's combative to getting the kids on something where they can focus on the positive sides of life. So, and I think the church still has a place in that. I really do.
Miss Sims, as you stated when you first came on, you come from a faith-based background. What do you see as a possible way to get youth back into the church community?
Well, first let me lead up to that. And the other two gentlemen weren't here when I told them that attend Zion Baptist Church, old school Reverend Curtis A. Herring. Now his son is there.
He was my neighbor.
Yep. And So that's the church I started attending, and I'm also a retired 30-some year faith-based organizer, community organizer. So my perspective will be coming from those kind of experiences. Now, when I first started out in organizing, and it came through from the church, the pastor was some some things outside social injustice were going on with the school system, housing, and so I stepped forward because at that time something was going on that shouldn't have been with my son at high school. You know, he went to North High School, so that was my launch. But during that time, I could see a change when I first started in organizing and going to the church. There's things were geared towards the church was if they were combined to do things, and even still now there are two real behavior patterns that society works from. It's social justice and social service. Back then, where I was coming from, the corner I was in, and the fights we were fighting was the social justice issues that were affecting our community at that time and still do now, like things that were going on at school, rent, treatment of people, and things like that. And so we were out doing that. But I could tell that as society outside the church changed, it changed to the social service model. It went from social justice to social service. And the church changed too because society was going through various ills and etc. And so a lot of the attention and even foundations money went to the immediate needs of people, whether they had food, uh, shelter, et cetera, et cetera. And so, as the societies went through that money crisis and et cetera, and people were in harm's way, they became more destitute. And so the church naturally, and people, well, as I said before, people make up the church. Their immediate needs right then and there needed to be seen to. And so, in my experiences, a big focus of the church turned to the social service model then and operated from that aspect of things that um, we were working on at that time.
Um,
And visually, in terms of the youth, visually outside the church, as I was growing, this is like I started in my early 30s, when I started visually noticing the change and difference in youth and men men and fathers. It used to be as we were growing up, the kids looked up to the fathers and wanted to emulate them and dress like them, etc., etc. During this changeover, when I started noticing grown men wanting to start dress like the younger generation, like one of the pants legs. Oh, you're smiling. You know it's true. You know it's true. And things. It caught my attention, and not only the dress. It seems like the robes. It kind of changed also in the attitudes. The adults were now looking towards the kids and things and enjoying what the young folks were doing. So I think a lot of that was lost during that period in terms of the respect and the whatever it took for society to function in a balance. And even the music, you are touching on that. I love old time spiritual religious music because because I understand what they're saying and what's going on. It touches the human spirit. It's what motivates a human being, and they talk about what's going on. Whereas even when the youth music started creeping into the church, it was a turnoff to me. Number one, I still don't understand it. My son knows it and loves it, but it was more like an invasion. Now, the ministers and deacons and whatever, they were trying to gear the youth that were still in the church. their thing was, okay, let's rearrange the music with the upbeat and the tunes that the children are going to swing and sway, and it's going to catch them. And I never bought into that because it didn't make sense to me. Where now the role reversal seems to be going on in those aspects, and I think it contributed to where we are now in regards to the youth as you're speaking of, and the lack of various things. And Mr. Mr. King, I think our generation, which is the '60s, we did not pass a lot of things down through the ages. We didn't. And I think about that now that I'm aged and my cycle of life that I'm in. I look back and see, because if you remember during that time, it was everybody for himself. Do your thing. I can tell you, who to sock it to, and it was a big thing for society to now. They discovered individualism, I guess, and bought into it. And I think some of that's good and positive, but we lost some things in it, and a lot of people didn't realize that. Our generation didn't realize that.
And
Well,
we don't.
uh, before I get you, Mr. Christopher, I'm going to make, like some real hard observations here because coming home as a Vietnam veteran, there were the first thing that I had made up my mind is that if I had kids, they would never have to go through the things that I went through, which meant in the long run that instead of me being the role model of a father, I was more of the guy that came home with gifts. I was the guy that made sure that you had new clothes to go to school with. Uh, as you said, Mr. Scott, I was not necessarily the father that was going to take you to church, but I was the father that was going to yell at you if you didn't do what your mama said. You know. So I think that we got so caught up in trying to make sure that things were better, quote unquote, for our children that, like you say, Miss Sims, we lost accountability as parents and we wanted to be their friend. It wasn't like grandma and grandpa were to us the authority figures. We wanted to be their friends, like you said, we started dressing like them. We wanted to emulate their music. Uh, Reverend Christopher, is that when things changed for you? When parents decided that they wanted to be friends instead of parents?
I think things changed for me. I'm one of those, and I was born in 1964, and I'm one of those children who parents had babies too young. I mean, my dad was 16, my mom was 17 when I was born, and they tried to get together and they tried to stay together. When I look back on it, I think that's when this whole thing started changing. I think people were still going to church. I think our people were still believing in God, but the church was more than just a church to us. That was the reason. It's one of the reasons why I think that a lot of black people do not go to therapists because the church was our therapy.
Mm.
Um, why a lot of black people don't trust, having their money in certain places. I mean, we cash people's checks at our church. You know, um, food. You can go to church and you can get food. There's a lot of things that the church was building the community on that it just do not do anymore. The church is not there for people. They're there to make sure that preacher is driving a nice car. That's just how I see it right now. I don't see a lot of preachers out in the streets talking to these young people. I don't see a lot of preachers feeding the community as they should. I think where we dropped the ball is in just like Miss Sims was saying. She said I couldn't get wrapped up into the young music that was coming in. And like I said before, we have a lot of people in the church who are like that. And that pushed the young people away. So now, like I said, those young people are just out in the streets. And I think the church did a disservice to himself because it's the kids that go. My church right now, once they start, I have an elderly church. Everybody in there pretty much is elderly. Once they start going, that church is going to be going downhill. We have to rebuild this church again because we couldn't understand that maybe somebody else got a kind of different understanding than what we have. And now we're hurting.
Mr. Christopher touched on something that I meant to touch in terms of the changing of the church. Nowadays, from my experience, the church people that were in the church when I was coming up, they have moved out of the communities and for various reasons and been whether they for house or kind of like coming in from the suburbs to church on Sunday and maybe prayer meeting and things. And so during the week, like Mr. Christopher is saying, very few people are from our neighborhood or that even know each other live in the neighborhood to physically support the church or go over to clean it or when you have a choir practice, we're coming from all directions of the surrounding cities. That's one of the changes. And I think that was very profound what he said.
Mr. Scott.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And you look at the history of the Black church and its importance and how many people have been so important in the Black church. You really look at one of the aspects is the music. Now you look at all of the tremendous R&B, soul, blues singers. They all started in the church.
Correct, yeah.
They all started down south. I'm talking about Lou Rawls, Sam Cooke, James Brown. I mean, they all started. That's where they got their start. That's where they got their musical, cut their teeth with their music. And so there's always been this kind of dichotomy between, playing the devil's music or playing this different. There's always been that there. But I mean, I think, me coming up, the church seemed to be able to deal with it. They continued to try to have youth programs. They continued to do things in the community. And like the young lady was saying, when I first started at Bethesda Church, which is downtown Minneapolis, everybody lived around there. Now, all those houses, the freeway has come through the street. Nobody lives within 3 or 4 miles of that church now. And so they have, I attended it, something I had to do with Pilgrim when I was working with them, and I was excited to go back. And the funny thing is, I saw 2 or 3 older ladies. They were sitting in those same seats that I used to see them sit in as a child.
Right.
Seeing Miss Bannon, they were there. That's like, it was just, it really did something to me to see that what the church and what religion meant to them was, it was part of their life. I mean, they were going to be there. That was their seat, and they're going to be there every Sunday. And I mean, these ladies had outlived my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, who was a deacon there. So I think it's really up to this generation to really make it happen, to make it really. I have, my kids went to a religious school. I wanted them to know and make up their own minds about it. And, the whole idea of religion is much of it is a quandary. When you see, I grew up with some people that were Catholic. I grew up, so there was a Catholic church that was right around the corner from my grandmother's. Never saw anybody go in there. I said, what? I never saw. And I asked my father-in-law, he's 99 years old now. He said, oh, yeah, they built that church for the Black Catholics to go there because they didn't want you going to St. Joan of Arc down on 46th Street They didn't want you there, so they built another church for you to go to. And so what we're battling is always the separatist, this we're better, or we don't want to be around us. And I think that's the church really mended that. They had an environment, they had a world that we could be part of, that we, were all the other church people, and they were encouraging you. They'd see you out in the street or whatever. By the time you got home, mom know all about it. Where you've been, what you did,
But,
and
but,
that,
Mr.
yeah,
Scott, I got to interrupt you there
sure.
because as I told Miss Sims, and I don't know whether Reverend Christopher knows about it or not, but I'm a preacher's kid, and it just so happens that my father's first church was an AME church. Now, you can't tell me more about decisiveness than a preacher in an AME church getting up on Sunday morning and talking about a Methodist minister or a Baptist minister. So don't bring me about all this unity and stuff. No, come on. Look, I'm like Mr. Tucker. I'm for real. You can't bring me that BS.
No, 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 no. But I think you misunderstood my
Yeah,
point.
he did. Yeah,
I think you misunderstood my
yeah.
point. What my point is like, okay, one of my heroes is Muhammad Ali. Okay, and so they would get him on a TV show and ask him about, well, why are you Muslim? Why are you this? Why are you? And he said, well, as far as I know, every religion is good. Moses was good. Buddha was good. Muhammad was good. Jesus is good. But this works for me. He said, Muslim, it works for me. And I think that's religion should be a personal thing. There is the divisiveness. In our world, there's the Methodist, the AME. There's 15 or 20 other denominations that I had never heard of. I went to a church once in Minneapolis for a service. No instruments. No instruments was allowed in the church.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
And the ushers, they sang. And I'm telling you, they sang with the bass parts, with the soprano parts, but that's the way they did their church. And I think that's this divisiveness that we have. It extends into a lot of areas in the church, into where we live, into, as your great friend Mr. Tucker would say, the great petty bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when Mr. Scott was speaking of, and the way I heard him, he was speaking of the connectedness of people in the church, and it reminded me of maybe at a prayer meeting or something. When we were all gathered or meeting, and the pastor would come up and say, "Okay, now it's time for us to get started," and people that were there kept talking and talking and going on, and he had to repeat that. And I noticed more than one occasion, and I had to stop to think, no, what's going on when that happens? Because I look at people's behavior. Then I stopped to think it wasn't out of disrespect for him. It was that coming to church was probably the first time we had seen black people during the week, so we were glad to see each other and had a lot to share, because on my job I was the um, only black person in where I worked, and I was a lot of the people worked in the suburbs, so I was their black experience. But we were so, and I guess just to tag on to what Mr. Scott was saying, he wasn't going to the extreme. I just heard him explaining the connectedness and the unity that people felt near each other and being around each other and doing things.
Uh, Reverend Christopher, how do you find that particular experience? Do you find that things have changed as far as um, uh, I, one of the things that I find is that we have a lot of, and I'm going to use your city and my favorite gentleman as an example. When Reverend Sharpton came to your fair city, and for about a week and a half, I'm out here in California, and I didn't even know that there were other people that lived in Minneapolis other than Reverend Sharpton and those four gentlemen that were always at the podium with him. Now, we all talked about the amount of money that the family received, and somewhere down in there, I don't know, maybe you guys don't remember, maybe I do because I'm out here in California, but there was a specific dollar amount that was raised for the city of Minneapolis. Now, um, I, I have a very critical eye when it comes to some of these so-called civil rights leaders that and I'm including Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, a bunch of the guys that I grew up with that are still the faces of the black community. And just like the church, I think we need to see some youth up there. I want to see. I mean, they don't have to be as young as the gentleman that we saw that you have running for councilman 25. But I think that we at least need to see a changing of the guard. I mean, Al Sharpton has changed bodies since what Fat Al. We had the Fat Al from the Bill Cosby era. Now I mean, come on now. I mean, where are our youth leaders coming from if we are not the ones that are putting them in place?
Power is a powerful thing. Power is a powerful thing.
Yes,
When
sir.
you give somebody power like Jesse has, and Jesse ran off of being right there side of MLK for years, and that gave him clout. And Al Sharpton came out of New York and the things that he did. Those two guys, and here's the thing: it's not that black people are picking them; it's white people. We let white people pick our leaders. Now, name me another race that when something goes wrong, all the white people run to that person. Name me somebody in the Hispanic. Name me a Muslim. Name me a white person that when something goes wrong, that they got to run to those two people and that's it. But we let them two come in, and the white people says every time something goes wrong, we got to go to Jesse. Every time something goes wrong, we got to go to Al. And they just became the it. And nobody really said anything. Even when Al messed up with that girl, Tawala Brawley, when he messed up with her, to me, I'd have been like, no, Al, you can't represent us like that. But they're not going to let that power go. So you're not going to see any young people come in. It's just like they started Black Lives Matter. That was a youth group. That was youth getting up saying, we're not going to take it anymore. Let's do something right. Even though they went about the way they did it, they still got the needle to be moved. And when you can get the NFL to start writing, race this and race that on the back of people's helmet, putting it on the field, you move the needle. They never went to them and started talking to them and asking them questions. They kept going back to the old regime because they know the old regime can come in and put us in our place. They can go just like what happens here. So if you ever notice, every time they had a funeral, it's at one church, Shiloh. Like that's the only church in Minneapolis. Shiloh. The mayor goes to Shiloh. The governor goes to Shiloh. Any white lawmaker, they go to Shiloh. What I'm saying is we let them do this. We let them make Al Sharpton. We let them make Jesse Jackson. And they're not going to give up power to let these young kids in.
to tag on to what Mr. Christopher is saying, as he's talking, and I'm remembering two things. As I spoke before to Mr. King, our generation has to pass things down to the next generation. And during the younger days of the men that we're speaking of, when they were out there, the media, the news broadcasters, they were the ones that back then even black folk gravitated towards, because at that time we needed people that had the courage to step forward, and so there were men and women that did that. Even Don and Ron, Don Allen speaks of. Those were men that we saw all the time. But some of the black community was saying, well, wait a minute, they don't speak for everybody in the community. They aren't the only leaders out here. But the media, broadcasted. They did it was their job. That's how they made money, to do a story. And so they elevated the persona of these people to various heights. And so we conditioned ourselves and the white community that these men were the one and onlys. And through the years, if you think about it, some of the men that were out there during my time, they're no longer there anymore. Some of them have died and passed away. And I don't know what youths have taken their place. Or I think that place is vacant, kind of now. And these men that are still out there, but even back then, they had a value to the community. And when you see them now, they're a part of the community, still values what these men and women are able to do and can do.
But Ms. Sims, one question. One question. What has Jesse Jackson done for the community? What am I missing?
Well, he's one of the ones that I haven't
He
seen.
reinvented the dictionary. He reinvented the dictionary. That's what
I
he did.
saw him slide off the scene in my corner of the world doing that. You just spoke of it with a young lady. To me, he kind of dissipated. I don't know what he does now locally or nationally. He's not the one that I personally see out there. But whatever he's doing, and if he's out there, there is some, and I always go on look at people's behavior too. There's some portion of the community, whatever they're going through or whatever they need, these men are. Crump is one of the ones that I guess the young ones that are out there that's seem to be feeding a lot of the legal needs of people out. Of one of the younger ones that are coming up, I guess. But we have conditioned ourselves and conditioned people around us, which we're talking about the white society, that they're the people that you visually see on TV are our leaders, are the only ones that speak for this. But within the black community, as all of you will certainly know and realize, that isn't necessarily so. Like, I do watch a Don's show with you gentlemen on there. Some of the tops, I just shake my head up. But Mr. You just mentioned his name, Mr. Tucker. I never heard of him before on that show. That man, he knows a little bit of everything, and the way he expresses himself, some of the things that he has experienced that maybe has made him bitter or made him. He knows where the bones are buried, and he knows who's burying the bones.
Yeah, but he don't ever tell us. But he don't ever tell us. He don't ever tell us where the bones are buried, and he don't ever tell us who did the bones. He always just tell us he knows. And I think
But
Ask him, he'll tell you. He'll tell you. Have you asked him? That man will tell you.
but I think you both are hitting on just a really good point, because as I know coming up, see, my mom, born and raised in Birmingham, went to Parker High School and came up here after high school. Her mom, born and raised in Talladega, Alabama. When my grandmother talked about going to church had a dirt floor. Okay. So I'm a little kid up here in Minneapolis, and they're watching down in Birmingham the dogs, the hoses, the streets that they walk through. See, so there was this huge sense of urgency about what was going on with us in those days. And that's why you had people that rose up like the Malcolm X's, the Mr. Muhammad's, it needed we needed to have a punch back. This is what we need now. But we have not somehow been able to nurture and bring up the type of movements that garner the attention and that garner the power to say that we're part of this. We're taxpayers in this country and we have every right to all the rights that are endowed on us as citizens of this United States. But they put their lives on the line to do it. The Marcus Garveys, and like I say, my grandmother and grandfather, them having lived down there in Birmingham and come up through all of that, my grandmother would say, when you get older, I don't want you to sit and watch TV with something like this. And I'll be damned if I didn't sit and watch TV with my two sons with the Rodney King thing. Okay? And then I'd be damned if I don't see the same thing with my granddaughters with the George Floyd thing going on. So this seems like we're in a cycle, and I just think in the 60s, sometimes it's like we're just being nostalgic and Mr. Tucker, the 60s, they don't know. But
But
there is
I,
something to be learned by having a voice. And there was a stronger voice back then. You would even could turn on TV and you'd see John Coltrane. You'd see all the greats, music people, right on regular TV watching. And everything has just been really I believe that this internet, that what they've done with TVs, what they've done is just a real controlling type of a thing. And it's really to really not let us keep this lid on blacks. That's my observation.
you see, I have a slightly different observation because I think that we went through a false sense of uh, entitlement as black people somewhere between 1990 and 2010. And the reason why I say that, I'll kind of parallel it with my movements. In 1990, I think I came back here from Paris and I was employed as a chef. I could go anywhere in the country and get a job. As a matter of fact, in 2003, I moved out here to California and I call myself moving out here on vacation. I ended up moving out here because I had three jobs. Now, I don't know if a young person, and when I say young, I'm talking about somebody under the age of 35, could come out here in California and find the same opportunities right now. I don't think that the same opportunities that existed within the black community in 1990 exist anymore. To give you another example, when I came out of prison the second time in I think it was 78, the government had a program where if you hired a felon, your company would get a tax break, and that would help pay for that person's job as well as, like I said, give your company a tax break. I don't know if those programs exist anymore. I think that we talk about education, and as I put that in job disparity within our community, we have this vast tool that we are a part of now. We're using the internet, but yet and still, we still have kids that are going through the same thing that I heard when I was a kid. Our children don't know how to read. Miss Sims?
And that's true. As you were speaking, and I'm gonna get to that, but as you were speaking, and you're from the Vietnam generation, and I have a brother who's 2 years older than I am. things were
I'm
changing.
2 years older than you. I'm
Yeah, yeah,
74 too. So
yeah. And I'm 72.
yeah.
But did you realize that things were changing when you came, as you were coming out of the service? Because before your group went in, um, soldiers were proud to come home and wear their uniforms, and that's how they were recognized.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
when the Vietnam soldiers came back, my understanding, they were told, and it was a threat to them to wear the uniform
We was
because
spit
they were
on.
they were
I,
targets because
I
the
was spit on
activists were
in an airport.
about the war and things. And since that time, it hasn't changed. Unless you know a veteran who's a they won't tell you for various reasons. You talk about education. One of the things that my parents passed on to all from a family of 9 children passed on to us was the love of reading. My mother read for adventure and mysteries and things like that. My father read for instructions, and he was a coal miner, but he was injured. I can remember him reading, and he liked to repair cars. And I can remember seeing him with a 3-inch thick car book with no pictures in them at
That's
all,
right.
and little words. And he would read and understand and go and fix the car. Now, one of the ways the love of reading that I had exhibited it was that, and it was when and this connects to family as we're speaking of. I'm from that generation of family looks after each other. So when I married at 21, and the man that I married was 21 also, we took on his younger brothers whose parents had died, and they were like 12 and 13. So you had 21-year-olds raising 12 and 13-year-old. We moved from West Virginia to Syracuse University while he finished his senior year there. And so that was a family connection. You look, his family needed the children weren't getting attention in the educational system in West Virginia, and they were going through struggles with an alcoholic aunt at home. And so there was a need for them to get out of there. I recognized the need, and I recognized, and I could see when he would come home, the stress. And so we decided to do that, and we did that. Now, the reading part came in, was when they came, because I had watched Sesame Street. Some of my nieces and stuff, when they would come, I've one time went home and someone was talking about Sesame Street, and so I started watching when the young men that we took on, they needed skills and stuff and reading and things. They were far behind, and so I started watching with them Sesame Street and Electric Company back then. And so I learned how it was easy how to teach somebody to read. And plus back then the fellow that I married, as I said, he was in special education. And so he was helping them also, but it got to the point sometimes where a relative can't teach the other relative to drive or whatever. And so I took on some of that. But also because of my skill of reading and loving to read, when my children were born, I started teaching my children at 2.5. I started teaching my son how to read because he and I sat down and watched Sesame Street together. And then when I noticed that he was paying attention to what was going on, that's when I started bringing out things. I started bringing out things for him that he saw on TV at 2 years old. Didn't have an interest, but in 6 months he had an interest, and he went on. So when he went to school as a kindergarten, he was probably reading at a 3rd grade level. When my daughter was born, the very same thing was her. But here's the catch: when my son went to school, because he could read, they had a hard time dealing with him. The teachers did, and they even said he knows how to read. And so as they were during that time, they were bringing in people from the university to help the children that were behind in their reading. So what they did to accommodate him, he wasn't a genius or anything like that. The kid knew how to read. He knew how to read and understood it. And so they brought tutors in from the university exclusively for him to not hold him back, but to fit into where he was at. And he went on, and he loves to read. When he would come home from college, he's into hip hop and music and things like that. And he would say the magazines while he was at college. So when he came home, he read to me and things like that. We still watch. He's 40 some years old now, but we will watch TV together. He taught me about boxing and wrestling. And my daughter reads, and she's more of an artist. But the reading aspect to me, with our children, we're losing our children. If you know how reading is the key to the schoolhouse door, and our children are lacking in reading. I would, and I'll say this, and when I worked downtown Minneapolis, I got into a reading program at Hennepin County, and so I would take vacation days to go to the Hennepin County in the courthouse there, and they had a program for kids who were delinquent and in trouble to bring them in, and me and other people come in and tutor them in reading. And they were behind and didn't understand, but they took tests. And the lady that was teaching them and instructing them, she had the test that they brought in from the schools, and she would look at them, the test brought in from the schools, and what we was experienced. And she said, I don't understand this. These children are reading higher than the scores. And what I found was happening when I tutored some of the students, they couldn't read. They were behind in reading, but we sat down together, like I did my children, and we read together. And I told them what was going on and about what they were reading. And they were amazed that just that reading of aspect that they gained knowledge and they knew what was going on. So that's the bottom line of anything, going back and capturing our children and bringing them back into the fold.
Reverend Christopher.
Yeah, you touched on something there for a second that I look at today and realize the reason why we are in the mess that we're in. Right now, these kids, you say you was 21 and you took on 2 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And you was there for those kids. And you made sure those kids read and you made sure they got their ABCs
Right.
and 1, 2, 3s. There's our problem right there. These kids right now are having kids at such a young age
Yeah.
that grandma and grandpa are the ones that are raising these kids. And with the kids being able to go out and then now, so they ready to party when they turn 21 with children.
Mm-hmm.
Those children are not getting the same thing that you gave your niece and nephew, right? Your nieces,
My
your
in-laws, my
your
in-laws at the
right?
time. I didn't have children at the time. My in-laws.
They're not getting the same thing. They
Right.
now these kids are young enough that these parents want to be their friend. I told my wife and I we were old enough when we had our kids and we got our partying out of us. Yeah, we hung out and had a good time. So when we was ready to have kids, we had kids and we did the things that needs to be done with those kids. No ifs, ands, and buts. That doesn't work these days. There's no accountability for any of these kids. I just got a text. There was a shooting. There was 3 people just got shot within the last 30 minutes at the gas station on Broadway. 3 people just got shot. Young people. That's what the problem is right now. These young people just don't have it right. We as black people are running around crying about the police department. Oh, the police this and oh, the police that. Don't you think by this time we as black people should have got together and those kids who wanted to be cops, we invest in their lives and we have our own black cops out there on the street right now? We don't do that because none of these kids want to go to the Explorers program. A lot of these kids can't even read to go to Explorers program, to pass the test, to read the test. But we're going to blame everybody else for our ill will when we're the one that's raising the very kids that are out here right now carjacking, shooting people, robbing. So we can't blame ourselves for the way that the kids are coming up. Those kids that was in that car crash, the kids that was in the 4 kids that was over in St. Paul,
Mm.
they stole the car. Here's the thing about it. The kid that was driving the car, the police knew him by name. They had dealt with him for so many things. If that kid was in that bad a shape that they knew him, somebody should have stepped in and saved that kid. Mom and dad should have stepped out and said, I cannot do the things I need to do for him. And I don't want him getting in trouble. So I want to make a better life for him. Can somebody help me? Didn't happen. They go off, they get in a car accident. Now it's everybody else's fault.
Uh, Reverend Christopher, in Minneapolis, what is the alternative? Because I'm one of those kids. I grew up as one of those kids you were talking about. Okay, I mean, the police knew me. That's the reason why they sent my little, you know, behind to the army. It's like, you know, we can't keep sending you to jail because evidently that doesn't do any good. So let's try this. Okay, but the point being, I mean, after I've told you all the story of like when they passed the three-strike law, I already had 4 strikes. Okay, so I had to learn how to use my street intelligence and my street smarts to find me a occupation that would satisfy my needs of hustling every day, my needs of being creative, and also make sure that I didn't have to go back down that path. So I became a chef. Okay. And that's the same thing when you talk about this young man. I don't know any more about him than what you're talking about. But if someone had grabbed him and said, hey, like, look at this here, like, is there anything here that interests you? And maybe it would have been car detailing. It might not have been the college education that we wanted for this particular young man, but it would have kept him out of that situation that he found himself in. So are we putting our expectations on these young men, knowing that they're not equipped to handle the situation, and placing even more pressure on them as a community?
Well, as Mr. Christopher was
Well,
speaking about
And
the children, one of the things that he left, I'll say this, was that these children, we as a society has set something in a perpetual motion that's cycling around now, and we're paying for it. We're losing our children to various things. And those children, one of the things that's keeping the children, I think, in perpetual wrong motion is that their parents don't know how, because they were part of that group that were having kids older and dropped out of school, et cetera, et cetera. So that's part of the perpetual motion and the cycle that society is in, and we're going as a society. We're going nowhere fast, and unless there's a intervention, and understand why there needs to be an intervention, we're going to lose generations, because historically, if you look back, where civilizations start to deteriorate, they start losing their children in their youth. And I think one of the things, big things in society, and looking back, that we allowed to happen was in the school system. Um, there used to be shop and woodwork, etc., etc. And those things, I believe now, are are not in schools anymore. The thing was, every go to college, go to college. Everybody go to college. Everybody's interest is in that college. The kids that go to college and become professors, they need a house to live in. They can build your body, but not a house. They need a car to get to work. Those kids that were interested in doing not going to college, but interested in doing other things, we cut them out of everything. We allow the policy makers and the powers that be to eliminate those kind of things for our youth. And they're out there in that perpetual motion. One of the things that I was going when that I was younger, I would go to Metro State to take college courses, and I would hear the teachers. One of the professors, one of the things that irked them was the kids would come that know how to use computers for media, how to get on the media, but they didn't know how to deal with for Word documents or how to write their papers and et cetera, et cetera. So they were frustrated and didn't know how to think or had to come up with some way of teaching these graduates from high school how to do the basics on something that they were using for fun and games. I'm sorry, Mr. Scott, I cut you off.
Well, no, I was just, just going to springboard on what you guys are saying, because without these opportunities, I know, like growing up, coming out of high school myself, almost everybody I knew, they went over to the Ford plant. They went over to the post office. They went to the service. They went to college. But there were these outlets. There were these things for people to go right into after high school. And by closing a lot of this, and this isn't just a Minneapolis or St. Paul problem. This is going on all over this country. The shootings, New York, Chicago.
Chicago,
You see
San
this
Diego, Los
everywhere.
Angeles.
It's going on everywhere. This is just not a problem here. And I think there's been just a total erosion of, like you say, none of the shot. North High School here in Minneapolis had one of the best auto mechanic programs in any high school in Minnesota. Oh, they just ended it. Oh, we don't have enough money for it anymore.
Yeah.
Those guys used to get out of there, and if they went to the service or they had a skill, they could use that to maneuver through these things. This is how you have to work vocationally into these different jobs. You're taking
They
away.
had a they had a radio station in there. I don't know if they
They
still
had a
have
radio
it.
station where they could learn how to broadcast and learn the technical aspects of running a radio, the licensing requirements, the FCC requirements, so that if you want to really get into that, you can learn it or get your start right in high school. And they've taken all that away. They've closed a great school, Minneapolis Central High School, which had one of the greatest principals. Kids were coming out of there going to Nebraska, playing football. A couple of my good friends played pro football because of those coaches there and the networks that they would set up to do for the kids in the community. And that's who can we blame for that? I mean, who
Yep.
actually can we blame for that? Why allow them to close that school here? I still pay taxes for schools. There's no schools here in the neighborhood I live in. If I look at my tax bill, I'm paying for schools. Well, what benefit am I getting for it if you're not teaching these kids to do things other than go upside somebody's head or shoot each other?
Yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah. My two children are 4 years apart. They went to North High, and I could see the atmosphere change, the school atmosphere from teachers, administration when they would come home. That because all of a sudden they were calling their teachers by their first name. I said, wait a minute, no. They would say George this and George. I say no, Mr. Roberts, and the teachers start dressing like the kids, etc., etc. So the attitude also was evasive and growing all over. Now my son Howard went to the military 206, came out 210. When he came out, one of the things that he did was he wanted to do sheet metal. So he had to go out to Anoka Community College, and he took their because there didn't seem to be in here. He went out there and he learned the trade. And one of the things in talking to the teachers out there that they had, because the schools didn't have sheet metal and woodwork and a lot of the labor jobs anymore, they had men that actually worked jobs like that, whether they were the manager, whatever. They would come to every summer that they, in order to keep connections with the youth, they would have one of the things that they did for 2 weeks in the summer was junior high school students at that point. These men would come in and they would teach these children. They would take them to camp and relate to them, et cetera, et cetera. because that industry, like the industry my father worked in, it used to be passed down from father to son. But during the time, at some point, it got to the sons didn't want to be coal miners. They didn't want to go underground and do that dangerous. And the unions, their sons, a lot of it passed down father to son. And all of a sudden, their sons didn't want to go in it, so they're at a shortage too.
Yeah. Reverend, I know we kind of bypassed you, but what were
No,
your
no, no, no.
what were your thoughts there as you were listening to Miss Sims and Mr. Scott?
No, no, no. It didn't bypass me at all. Like I said, I enjoy listening, and when I listen, I learn a little bit, and then I can take what I've learned and use that when I'm talking to people. Um, you guys got more into this here than I do. I mean, Miss Sims and Mr. Scott, and I'm sure you too, Mr. King, have been out there working and doing things. If y'all have seen so many other things that I've seen, I'm just a little nappy headed boy from Mud Bottom, Memphis, Tennessee.
We all
That
learn from each other.
right. But at the end of the day, I agree with what they said. When you take the ability for a man to use his hands, like you said, plumbing, auto body, the vocational classes. When you take that ability away from him, what else do he have? He don't have anything. So now he's got to go out and try to make a life for himself. Now these bureaucrats, these people that we voted in office, they did this. They made what we see. But here's the thing. I don't like I said, I'm done blaming other people for what we've done.
Yeah, we allowed it. Yep.
We allowed it. And now it's time for us to start taking responsibility and doing something. That's why I work with Democrats, I work with Republicans, I work with Independent, I work with the Green Party. I myself don't call myself anything. I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat. None of that. If you're gonna do what's right and make sure that everybody get a piece of the pie, I'll vote for you. I don't care who you are. The first time I ever voted was for Ronald Reagan. And I voted for him because I'm a military brat. My dad's in the military. And on the military base, all you hear is the Republicans take care of your daddy's check. So I'm taking care of my daddy's check. That's who I'm voting for when it's all said and done. But it's
You should have called me,
sir.
You should have called me.
I should have called you.
I
I should have called you. But then, but the Republicans showed their racist ways, and Ronald Reagan came out and started selling drugs right there. Now, I lived in Oceanside, California, for a year and a half until I moved up to Anaheim, and Mr. King. I can definitely say exactly what you were saying, that when I got out there, we moved out there. I moved out there with nothing. I got a job at the Carlsbad Sears doing floors and emptying garbage right away. I guarantee you that wouldn't happen to a young man today. I got out there in 87, 88. I got out to California and hung out there for a little bit until I met my wife, and she's from here, and that's how I ended up here. But at the end of the day, my mom made sure that we had our ABCs and our 1, 2, 3s. She made sure that we was reading my books. She's got 4 kids. All her 4 kids are successful. I've got a brother who's in the Army. In the Air Force. I got a sister who's in the Army. My other sister is a nurse. I'm a professional. I do what I do here. My brother's out in Anaheim, California now. When he retired, he's an engineer on the Pacific trains out there. So she made so when people sit there and say, where did we go wrong? I've got to look at it and say, if everybody had some Irma jeans in their life that beat your butt when you didn't do right and didn't care if the social worker showed up because you was walking out the door buck naked because you wasn't taking nothing she bought, we'll have a different story. But hey, I'm just saying. I'm
Grandma,
just saying, Mr. Scott.
Well, you have to ask, again,
grandma would hand me the phone.
where
Did you want to call the police? You, yeah, yeah. She hand me the phone. Go ahead.
where are the parents in these things? I mean, that's the first thing you have to ask. Where are the parents? And this is where that generation, as we've discussed, seems to have just fell down. I mean, I grew up everywhere we lived across the street from a school. Everywhere I lived growing up. And my job was to take my little brother to school. His job was to take my sister to school, and her job was to watch my little brother when he went to school. We all lived. That was important to them. They wanted us to go to school and stay in school and stay out of trouble. We went to sports and did the church thing, and my grandmother was 30 some years old when I was born. She was young, but she was a domestic. She worked hard to send all of us to help send us to school with cash money to go to college because that's what they knew. They didn't know any other way. They thought that that was something that was so denied to them. Like my grandma would say, and down in Talladega, we had a school, but it burned down. And then they made us walk to another school. We had to get up for a day and walk over to the school. By the time we got home, it was night. And she said, Daddy just said, you all just stay home and work. And that's what she did. That's what they did. They stayed home and they worked. And they came up to Minnesota. They owned their own houses. They had property. They had cars. But you could do things then where I think society has really choked off a lot of the lifeblood for communities and especially Black communities of color to make a way. The schools that I went to, we had Black teachers. We had a teacher that was a science teacher. He was my dad's friend. He was a jazz musician. And so he told me, he said, look, you're going to learn here. I said, I don't like science. He said, well, you're going to learn something here. And he'd make me stay after school to earn this C. He said, you're going to get a C. But he took interest in all the students. And we don't have the right people in the schools. Exactly now, my son, one of my sons is a teacher. He said, these kids are clowning on the bus like you wouldn't believe. And he said some parents called him and said that they want to ride on the bus with the kids to keep things, they wouldn't allow it. They got to do background checks. They got to do all kinds of stuff. They won't let the parents on there with their kids. So, and now they can't even hire bus drivers. They're paying people $3,000 just to sign up to drive the school bus.
Yeah, same here. Same here.
They can't find it. So, I mean, we have this thing is really, it's run aground around in this country, and we see it every day. We see these people that elections fake. We can't believe in that. I mean, you really don't even know what to think about the virus. You really don't know. When I watched the Vikings football game the other day, there's 70,000 people in there. Not near one of them had a mask on.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Can
Not at
that
all.
be? Well, I mean, I'm just saying the things that we're fed and the things that we're taught.
Oh, look
It's
at
all
the NBA players, sir.
Well, I mean, now Miss Sims mentioned boxing, and I'm going to a boxing convention in L.A. Here on the 16th. And although it's only for 4 hours, well, out here in California, of course, in L.A. County, we have a mask mandate. Any indoor events, you must have on a mask. But just to make sure, I called to see about the booster shot. I have Moderna. I made sure I got my flu shot. I got my shingle shot. I know a lot of people aren't, whether you're vax or anti-vax, that's purely your decision. And that's kind of the way I feel about that. I made the decision that I felt was best for me. But we will be continuing our discussion on the role of the Black church in our community. If any of you would like to join in next week, I will be glad to send you the link. And as usual, I will put the questions up there. There's a couple that we didn't get to tonight that I'm sure that, I'll give you your final thoughts. So if anybody wants to deal with any of those questions that I didn't ask, they can deal with it. Miss Sims, I know usually it's ladies first, but I find that usually ladies have the most to say. So
Well, I
I'm
don't have
going
it in front. I don't have it in front of me. So you tell me. You have to tell me what's left, and I'll say or I'll say I don't know, or I'll shut up.
Well, let me say this here, Mr. King. I appreciate you guys for having me on. But five o'clock comes real early for me.
I hear you. All right. Well, why don't you give us your final thoughts first, and
um,
we appreciate you.
no. My final thought is again. I appreciate you guys saying what you say because like I said, I just get to bounce off of what you guys say with the little bit of knowledge that I have, and then pick up all the knowledge that you guys give me, and I appreciate that. But in closing myself out here again, I'm gonna say it again. I'm done blaming other people. Like I said, I honestly just got a text that three people have been shot on Broadway at the Murray's parking lot. Been shot. Police are on the scenes, and you know what? Everybody in that parking lot saw who shot. Everybody in that parking lot knows the color of the car. Everybody in that parking lot knows what the license plate is. Nobody's going to say anything. There is where we got a problem. So that's my final say. It's nobody else's fault but ours now. It's nobody else's fault but ours. You let the Somali people come here and they done jumped us already. You let the Hmong people come here. They done jumped us already. This is pathetic. But hey, I appreciate you, Miss Sims. Thank you very much. Mr. Scott, I'm sure I'll hang out with you and Mr. King. Thank you for having me on tonight. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. And yes, sir, I will definitely bounce back on here once again with you.
Yeah.
If this link works, I saved it, so I should be able to just pop in when I want to, right, Mr. King? Just
I might have to send you a new one, but now that you know how to get on, it shouldn't be any problem.
I got you. I appreciate you. Again, thank you guys very, very much. I so
Peace and
appreciate it.
love. Yep.
Yeah, y'all have a good night.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you
Bye
so
Good
much.
now.
night. Good
Right.
night. Good night.
Mr. Scott, your final thoughts for the evening.
Well,
I'm very disappointed. Anytime you let a Cleveland team win, but then leaving it to the Vikings. But that's all right.
yeah, well, Pittsburgh, that's a whole other story this year. But yeah, I hope, James and, your guests, that we can continue to explore the role of the church. I think it's an overlooked, it's a resource that's there. I mean, I think that it takes people that have faith, and I'm using the word faith as an open-ended subject, that we have to
Right.
have belief in positivity. And I think that the church, they have the potential to do that, but I also see them with mega churches and having the Bentleys and which things that are not really, in my mind, faith based. When you're faith based, what you are is you're helping those that are with you. You're helping those in need. And I think we need all the resources that we can get in the Black community here. I'm tired of hearing, as the reference to people getting shot every day, and and Minneapolis here is really over in the north side. Why isn't there police presence at these hot spots? These things are happening at the same place. Merwin Drugs at that gas station. It's happening at the same place. Why can't they have patrols there? Why can't they do something about that? We have a huge problem, and I hope to continue this discussion to see what we can come up with.
Well, I will be sending you a link, and thank you so much for coming on. I
No
appreciate you.
problem.
I'll see you Saturday.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Peace.
Nice to meet you.
Peace. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Uh, Miss Sims, it took me quite some time to get you on the show.
Yeah.
you know, I know you were a little skeptical, and I
I
wanted
wasn't skeptical. I was waiting for hours. You all just didn't. Your technology on that end failed you, failed you. I sat here for
Hey,
hours, but I understand. I understand, and I'm flexible. So I gave you another chance. Here you are.
there
Here
you
we are.
go. Well, thank you so much, Miss Sis, for coming
Yeah.
on the show and giving us some of your excellent background. Why don't you give us your final thoughts? And I hope you'll join us during this 4 week stint as we talk about the role of the Black church in the community.
I look forward to it. Send the link, and um, we'll touch bases if I'm available and whatever. I think whether you realize it or not, and even not, that you all are leaders in the community and what you're doing, and people are listening to you in various manners. I'll close out in saying that I'm a bottom line thinker. Like when I work with a lot of different individuals and stuff, they're talking with water, and I tell them, look, life and water, uh, having clean water is a do or die thing. If you don't drink water, you will die. You can do without food longer than water. 3 days after 3 days, your body starts breaking down. And so, what I was saying, leave to people, and it's because of where I'm at in the cycle of life of aging, and I'm looking back and seeing things that we are destroying and sabotaging ourselves and committing suicide if we don't look after each other. And the big part of that is our youth, because that's how God, or whoever you believe, set things up. Like and if you don't believe it, your youth, as you age, will be in a position to help you and will be doing things that you did for them. It all depends on what the relationship is. So uh, if your children aren't taught to read or how to function, when you get old and need to go to the doctor, and they can't read, that you need a prescription, etc., etc. That's one way that we as a society uh, sabotages ourselves. And I'll go out with this. I got sick recently, and I went to the hospital. I was laying there, and I was so sick and didn't feel good. I didn't care who saw my body. I mean, I'm out of shape and whatever. But there was this young man, the thin young white young man there as a nurse, and he was doing diligent for me. And I remember thinking or saying to him, be sure to thank your mother for somebody seeing to your education for you to be here to take care of me in my hour of need. And so that's just the cycle of life. If you live long enough, you're gonna die. And how we live and finish our lives, we have some say so in society, especially politicians and other people who are in positions that cut off things for the aged and whatever. When I come to you and dialogue with me, you're looking at yourself. If you live long enough, you're going to age. Your body's meant to do that. So as you're taking things away from me and putting in place, things that are negative and hurts me, when you get aged, when you become aged, you're gonna be denied the same things that you have denied other people. So it's really the cycle of life. I appreciate you, and you're very intuitive to things, Mr. King. Not only tonight, but on the Dawn Show. Like I said, you guys, I just shake my head at you sometimes. I was raised around 7 brothers, and whatever. I just shake my head.
Well, see that it's very appropriate. I have 7 sisters,
Oh
so
wow. Wow.
that's
Well, you know
uh,
the other side too. You know where
there
I'm
you
coming
go. That's
from.
right, and all of them were black. So
Yeah, yeah.
okay. All
Right,
right.
right, right.
I enjoy
All
you,
right.
Miss Sims. You
All
have a
right.
good
Peace
night.
and love to you. Till the next time. Good night,
All
everyone,
right.
to you. Bye bye.
Yes, sir. Uh, Brother Williams. Brother
Yes,
Williams.
sir.
How have you been? It's been a week. Uh, been trying in some ways, but I came up with this theme uh, partly because of my background as a preacher's kid, and partly because of my lack of faith in organized religion. But
Mhm.
I also realize how important the idea of the black church is within our community. So whether or not it has that special importance to me personally, it is still an integral part of our community.
Yeah.
So I thought that we should explore uh, the role of the black church, and as I put it, the role of the black church in communities of race, crime, educational, and job disparity. So I'm going to kind of drop it off in your lap here. Considering the Panther philosophy, uh, uh, that very educational book that you sent me. I've been reading through it. I can't read through it at my normal pace because there's so much to absorb. I find
Right.
myself going back. It's like, wait a minute, this was referenced here. I have to, so I kind of have to treat it almost like a thesis.
Hmm.
Uh, I'll kind of turn, as I said, it's more about the integral role within our community than it is my personal belief. But I'm sure, some of the programs that are entailed by the Panther organization also interact with uh, the church community.
Right.
I believe during the breakfast uh, program, for instance, a lot of those were held in community centers and church basements.
Hmm.
So there's also an integral part of the community built into the Panther Party. So you want to kind of, go into those things?
Yeah, let me elaborate so we can talk about it from the standpoint of how did we get here in the first place. Um, I mean, if you we can just even just take it back to the fact that religion and war, I would say, religion is the biggest precursor to wars.
Yes.
Um, Religion and land; those are the two things you really go to war over: religion and land. Um, and in saying that, when you talk about the founding of the United States and the role that the Africans played, when there was a certain point to where they wanted to further indoctrinate us, basically the Bible was used to do so. In fact, it was like there was a black Bible, a slave Bible, so to speak, that was actually given to us and helped to use to indoctrinate us. And one thing you have to understand about religion that it applies to just warfare and being weaponized. Religion in itself is always been a tool that could be used to enslave a people. And I'm not saying this to knock Christianity, Islam, or any other religion per se. The point is you just have to understand the role religion plays on the individual. Oftentimes, when we are physically challenged and going through certain types of hardship in our physical vessel, religion is a way of recognizing a potential escape or a potential better um, avenue for us, whether it be in the hereafter, or whether it be just through inspiration or looking toward hope. And so that aspect of religion has always played a significant role in terms of pulling the people through whatever they're enduring. Now, as it applies to Black people in the United States, or in specifically dealing with enslavement, uh, the Holy Bible played a great factor in that, simply because what it did was it gave us a potential hope regardless of our current condition. And when you take anything that has been written the way the Bible has, to where you're talking about a historical, not a lot of times it's not even proven, but a historical or a past or a story that basically that sounds very similar in its makeup to the struggle that we've encountered in terms of crucifixion. Now it tends to give people the perspective that everything that we're going through is in fact no different than what Jesus went through in terms of his dealings. And then when you talk about the fact that looking in the Bible as it applies to him being crucified, and it applies to the way slavery is portrayed in the Bible, then it leaves a lot of room for manipulation, a lot of room to be able to alter, a person's path and a person's identity and a person's way of perception of life in general. And especially when you go into it from the standpoint of saying humanity is inherently evil, and you associate that with the fall of humans, then basically it creates an environment to where it creates an expectation that humans are going to treat each other bad. It creates an expectation that there's going to be oppression. It creates an expectation that no matter how holy or how good you are, evil is the ultimate outcome, and evil is basically the ruler, like how they say Satan or Satan is the ruler of this planet. So when you look at things that way, and you take, for instance, just the oppression that we faced as a people from the time slave ships landed here on up to the current times, then the Bible can be used as a form of encouragement that what you are enduring is expected. And so to me, that helps create the bedrock for our victimization mentality that goes into acceptance. And
See,
then go
uh,
ahead.
I hate to interrupt you, but but once again, being a preacher's kid, one of the things that I noticed right off the bat, and when it comes to talking about youth, the verse "Suffer little children to come unto me." I mean, to a lot of people, that verse might not have the same particular significance that it has to me. But the idea, and I know it's not literal, but to start a verse off like that, it 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 already puts you in a state of submission.
That's what I'm getting at. And being able to weaponize, you know, versus that way is just very easy. And again, when you look at the main person of the Bible, Jesus Christ, as it applies to, there is no greater suffering than what he endured from that standpoint, because as it applies in the Bible, he could do no wrong, and from that standpoint, even he was crucified. So when you take a situation where you have someone at obviously at that anointed statue and could do no wrong, how does it give anybody below that an opportunity to be any different in terms of what they go through and what they endure and how oppression is applied? So right then and there, it gives you that gateway to be able to create a life of acceptance, which is why I said that brings about the victim mentality, because right then and there, now you're expected. And not only you expect it, but looking at Rome and looking at any other government from that standpoint, is hey, this is what the government does. This is how they treat their people. So it creates a level of expectation. And by creating that level of expectation out of the government and out of humanity, now you just basically cave into saying that things are going to be this way, and the only avenue is the hereafter in terms of a better, in terms of a better life. And so right then and there, you physically have the mentality to be submissive. You physically have the mentality to not buckle the system because it's given up to Satan, is given up to this is the way things are going to be, this is how it is, no matter how much you fight. That's not the right fight. You need to fight the good fight and deal with your personal salvation, and kind of sort of leave it at that, which, you know again, I think it ends up doing a lot of harm for those people, the mass majority of our people, that just simply buy into it from the stance of the way it was handed over to us. That's why I say you have to look at how Christianity and Islam was handed over to us in terms of the religion. So why is it when it's in the hands of black people is docile? But when used in the hands of other people, then it has to do with conquest and conquering, and overtaking, and challenging and rising up to the occasion, and creating jihads, holy wars, and things like that. Well, we're not taught to operate from that perspective when we look at the Bible. And then what you find is you find that it's been passed down, the pacification aspect of it, and the calming down and part of it has been passed down through generations by the way pastors have been taught, black pastors have been taught to preach it. So when they deal with the gospels as it applies to that, this goes back, and a lot of people don't recognize it, but this just goes back to the slave Bible, and how we were taught to interpret the Bible. So if we were taught to take it in and embrace it from a position of inferiority. And it is so ingrained in how we view things and how we look at it now, that it's a part of how we operate. And then growing up where I did, up in the Bible Belt, is just out of control from that standpoint. And one of the things, though, another thing that's the obvious catch within any religion is that it does have a sense of teaching morality. Whereas oftentimes our backbone in terms of morality, in terms of right and wrong, in terms of good and bad, we get that primarily through religion. So between religion and between laws, and between what's taught to our children in school, these become the cornerstones of what creates our oppressive state in our condition, and how we view just revolution, how we view taking on challenges, how view going against the grain. And a lot of times it just religion just plays right into the weapon that's used against us to come out of this condition.
Now, I'm one that does not adhere to organized religion per se. That does not mean that I don't perceive of a higher being, but then, there are certain aspects of being a man that totally clash with the idea of organized religion. As like you said, that the submissive part, where I must, in order for me to receive A, I must submit to your will on B, and that does not always sit well with someone of my age. But I'm more concerned with, and we talk about this every week, with what's going to happen to these future generations. I intend to live to see some of it, but the point being is that I do not see, like, okay, uh, we had a rallying cry, Black Power. Okay,
Mhm.
what do today's youth have? I mean, they have Facebook, they have TikTok, but is there a common thread that we can organize around instead of being all of these little splinter groups, which more or less, if you stay splintered, you stand more of a chance of being destroyed.
Right.
Another little, bit I got from that reading material you sent
Hmm.
me. So, you know,
Right.
at some point, I mean, this is nothing. This is not rocket science. You know that if you take one stick, you break it very easily. If you take two, it's a little harder. If you take three, it's a little more. You put 10 of them together, it's almost impossible to break. Okay, I mean, so when you talk about getting back to the basics, what about basic knowledge?
Well, I would say this. Now, you said it's not rocket science, but it is social engineering. And social and social engineering is just as a complex of a science as rocket science. And see, oftentimes people don't think of it like that.
But to
And
me, but to someone my age, Brother
well,
Robert,
it's
this should
I
be
would
common
say
sense.
I would say your age and your perception and your experience. So I think you're taking for granted that you were critical, able to be a critical thinker and woke up. See,
Okay.
often a lot of our people, regardless of age, because I've ran into a lot of old fools,
Yes, sir.
who
Yes, sir.
basically, and see, this even goes in what I talked about a few weeks ago when I talked about the difference between being a person that's good at surviving and a survivalist. So oftentimes people have made it to a ripe old age because they are good at surviving and and what I call coping. See, if we've mastered the art of coping, then we've learned to live with our pains. We learn to live with our oppression. We learn to live with being a victim, and we cope with it, and we master being in that position. That don't mean we're solution based. It's a big difference between being a master coper and someone that is solution based. So now, being a good coper just means you're able to navigate and deal with your levels of oppression, but it does not mean that you conquered what creates that environment at all. It just simply means you learned how to navigate and operate within it, and not let it get the best of you to the point to where you break. But what does that mean to the next generation? So let's get into that aspect. So the deal is when we talk about what the next generation and how they're taking it. See, this kind of goes back to what I said about that you said it's not rocket science, but it is social engineering. One of the biggest things about, uh, or should I say, one of the biggest enemies to the younger generation is not being a good student of history, not recognizing the different markers in terms of being able to see the same patterns. Because if you don't recognize that you are following the same pattern as the generation before you, and you don't recognize that a foundation has not been laid to move you to the next step of the game or the next plateau to bring you that much closer to being able to have a valid way of fighting, then what you'll find is you'll find more protesting, you'll find more looting or rioting, and you'll find more disgruntled people. You'll find increase in crime. You'll find increase in incarceration. You'll find a lot of the same things that have happened time and time again. But what you won't find is a high percentage of those people that are actually getting involved in the day-to-day work to push solution-based operation. And religion, from that standpoint, I think they don't play as much of a victimization role within religion as past generations. But it's kind of like when you pull the rug from up under somebody, or you remove a specific foundation and you don't replace anything else.
A safety net. Religion
Yeah,
was a safety net for us. That's what it
right,
was.
right. It's a safety net. Now they don't necessarily have a safety net, but that does not mean that they overcame the situation. In fact, that goes back to, what I used to refer to as leaving somebody in their grace. If you pull the religion from a people or from a person and you don't have anything to replace it with, did you make them better off? You got to ask yourself that. It's one thing to not believe in a quote unquote white Jesus. It's another thing to not believe in any damn thing. And so, which one is worse off from that standpoint? You know, Neither one is leading you closer to being able to fight and stand on your own self-determined path. And so, being a student of history, we have to see where the flaws were, and we have to be able to navigate that so that we don't fall in the same traps, just with a different skin. So whether it's religion, whether it's politics, whether it's lack of education, whether it's the lack of pooling our resources together, or what is not recognizing, like you said, the conquering divide strategy, all of these things are still creating the same ultimate outcome, and that's an oppressed people. This is why I say every time that we must learn how to unify. But again, going back to social engineering, that is a very, very, very complex thing, because when a people step into a situation where, just say, we coming together as a collective to try to uh, talk about, let's just say talk about what we need to change. If we got a whole lot of dysfunctional baggage that we bring to the table as individuals, because mind you, we're collectively coming together, but we're still moving as individuals, then oftentimes as individuals, we're going to look at the solution as an individual instead of a collective matter. And so we don't necessarily know how to communicate with one another. So even going back into the example within the Bible, when you talk about the Tower of Babel, that that gives you a perfect example that of the conquer and divide strategy. That's one of the things you can see within the Bible when you study it from that perspective. You can see how a lot of the traps are related to current day events and situations. So when you divide a people and you keep them divided by not having a common language, not having a common culture, not having a common way of life, a common output, or a common perspective, then you put us all in a room together. All we're going to do is fight, bicker, and go in circles and still don't come up with anything. But yet we all may recognize that there needs to be a change. But if everybody still thinks like individuals, if everybody still carries a legacy of hurt, a legacy of pain, a legacy of victimization, a legacy of being oppressed and not knowing how to think like free people, then again, nothing is slowing down. The rate of oppression is not slowing down. So when we talk about unlearning the behavior that has caused us to think negative, think backwards, think like inferior beings, think like domesticated beings, then the time it takes us to recognize and get and undo and unlearn what path we're on, oppression has continued to move forward. Oppression is still advancing its operation. And so this becomes the plight that we're fighting against and fighting from, is the fact that a lot of times we're dealing with people that have to unlearn behavior by the time they're an adult, based upon how they been, their upbringing as came about. And you take that with the next person, and you take that with a room full of people, and our biggest problem that we face is learning how to just communicate with one another and give each other the same level of respect or the same level of insight or opportunity to be able to talk about a direction. And then it becomes a big cluster. That's why I said it. No, it's not rocket science, but it is social engineering. And people that don't know how to communicate with one another is a very a strategic weapon.
Another thing that I find within when I talk about education and job disparity, a couple of things I saw that even though you weren't up on the screen, you were there when we were talking about trades and the absence of trades within our educational system. But, once again, I go back to a successful use of our community's resources. You have people that have worked within these occupations. You have people, that have the type of skills that are needed for other people to learn. But we don't seem to either want to um, educate people in terms of trade because it's not glamorous. Those aren't the jobs that uh, you were always taught. You graduate school, you go to college, you get a good job, you wear a shirt and tie to work. Well, everyone is not uh, made for that type of environment. And not only that, in order for our society to live and breathe, we need craftsmen. Why have we lost the sight not only of, like I said, using the resources of our elderly, but also not not directing our youth toward these jobs when they obviously are either not concerned with that type of higher education, or in today's society, they might not qualify as far as finances are concerned. So, uh, I mean, it once again seems like we are wasting resources rather than taking advantage of resources.
Well, I think that still goes right back to what I was saying when I talk about us being trapped in and stuck in this domesticated mentality, because oftentimes what people pursue or think they're going to pursue is the economic factor, and they don't look at things from the position of being a skill a person that's skilled in a craft that is always on in demand. See, when you're talking about an environment, especially now to where everything is technologically driven, then what people, especially the youth, relate more to is electronics, computers, cell phones, and they're getting pushed in that environment. And so when you talk about an electrician, when you talk about a plumber, when you talk about a carpenter, these things don't have that type of appeal to the youth because it's not being pushed on them. Whereas anything that has to do with an advance in technology is being pushed on them, if that. And the unfortunate thing about that is, and see again, to me, that goes right back to when I say being a student of history. They don't recognize the fact that these are stable career paths that basically at this point are always going to be there. You're always going to need electrical right now anyway. I would just say for the next 50 years, it does look like we're going to be still using copper wires in our houses. I don't think we're going to get to a point where quantum physics has taken over to where we're going to replace copper with light, not in the next 50 years to the common house. So you're going to use copper wire. You're going to have plumbing. You're going to have houses made of wood. You're going to have houses made of concrete. These are the kind of stable careers and stable things that right now are not going to go away in the near future. But they don't have that mass appeal, and they don't have that level of attraction that high tech environments carry. Whereas high tech environments are always changing and always growing, even though a lot of people are attracted to those, they're not able to keep up. and so they are attracted to the end result of that technology, which is why so many people become users, and so many people are getting more and more bought up in the consumption versus producers, because the learning curve is very steep when you talk about high-end electronics, uh, dealing with computer programming, data entry, and just the analytics and all that stuff that goes into the software back end. Yet alone talk about the physical hardware part of the electronics, but these are the type of things that the youth are attracted to, and so having the mentality to recognize stability, recognizing controlling, a lot of times controlling your own um, destiny by the fact that you can get into residential and you can work, basically open up a business or open up shop and work for yourself, or you dealing with a trade that has a demand that's going to have you always employed. Like for instance, dealing with the industry I deal in as a project manager, right now there is a shortage of qualified electricians. So electricians right now, there's way more jobs available than there are people employed in that industry. And the industry pays very well. But getting people to be attracted to the trade industry in black people in particular, for some reason, it's just very has been a very hard thing to do, because there's not a lot of glamour that goes along with that. That's that skill set, and unfortunately, we keep getting turned toward things that have glamour attached to it or have prestige attached to it, and so we end up chasing these things that really don't compete or don't give us opportunity to compete and control our own value as people in the marketplace. And I think that's what that goes back to, is recognizing that you have to set your own your marketplace value if you're going to be competing in that environment. And one thing I do want to say while we're on this subject, uh, San Diego Black Panther Party is planning right now a career exposure day for the youth on November the 13th and 14th at the world famous Imperial Barbershop in San Diego. Uh, and the idea behind this is that we want to catch the youth at the age, basically by the time when it, from the fourth grade to the ninth grade. Reason being is oftentimes our children are attracted toward career paths that really don't have much of a meaning or don't benefit us, or as well as within that age factor, we're not even thinking about career paths, and we're not being exposed to people that are in engineering and science and trades that can give us an idea of how that work is, and catch us early enough to where we start preparing our life to be able to advance in these fields by the time we get to high school. And what we keep finding is our children don't know what they want to be and don't have any idea what they want to be until they get into their sophomore senior year, and even if it's that early, and by then, if nothing else, they just go ahead and go to college and end up jumping into career paths within college and switching their majors up half the time if they even go to college. But if
or
we
not
catch them,
graduating.
right, or not graduating, right? So it's like if we catch them early enough and expose them to other black people or minorities within the community that are working within these fields and make it interesting for them, then we have a higher chance of them recognizing this stuff and being able to gravitate around that and work toward those fields and these trades. And so that's something we're planning and working on as
I,
well.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, and especially that age group, because as someone that has been through that criminal justice system, I find that when you try to reach kids once they become teenagers, it's much more difficult. But if you can catch youth between that fourth grade to ninth grade level, and their minds are much more susceptible, much easier to mold, and they are also at that time becoming their own little individual selves. I think it's much more effective than waiting till someone becomes a teenage fellow.
Right. And another thing, another factor in dealing with social engineering, and one of the unfortunate things that you don't hear people talk too much about within the Black community, is that is also the age group in which the child, before the age, the fourth grade, your children tend to look up to the parents as being their greatest influence. But usually, right around that age group, they start recognizing the flaws within their parents. And so they get shattered in terms of looking at their own parents oftentimes as role models. And so when they go from not seeing from seeing their parents as a role model to not seeing their parents as a role model, then they're kind of just out there. And then when you don't expose them to progressive and positive influences, but yet they're constantly getting inundated with stuff that they see on YouTube and social media, and these fabricated, job environments to where somebody has a all they do all day is basically create videos on YouTube, and this becomes their inspiring goal in life, is to just be someone with a YouTube channel and making money. Then again, where is the skill set that employs you or puts you in a position where you're actually able to be self-determined? When we talk about the trades, the general trades, where we talk about plumbing, carpentry, or electrical, these are things that put you in a position of where you can control your destiny. You can have an ability to impact how your life is controlled. Because food, clothing, and shelter. When we talk about shelter, any environment to where you're able to manipulate and control your shelter and build your shelter, that is an asset. But if you're pursuing a career path that does not, make you an asset in terms of what you can bring to the table, you know again, what good does it do us to try to improve our condition collectively? Now this goes back to the collective value as a people. Again, when we talk about the past, when we look into Black Wall Street, when we look into any environment to where we have benefited as a people, that is because we had skilled laborers who knew how to build communities from the ground up. Whereas if I'm a YouTuber, that trade is not going to do much for building up my community. Not at all. It may individually create gain for me, but now when you talk about the millions of YouTube channels that are out there, statistically wise, what is my percentage? See, I'm only driven by what I see in terms of how much money I can generate, not what value I can place upon a society. And so we have to get our children back into recognizing actual value that you are able to bring to the community, and then build your career path based upon that. So we have to stop thinking like individuals and start thinking like a village. What does it take for my village to be functional? What does it take for my village to be intact? What does it take for my village to circulate the dollar? What does it take for my village to be profitable? See, thinking like a community, thinking like a village, thinking like a together unified people is totally different than thinking like an individual. And I think that's what's missing in terms of the formula of where our people are headed.
Let's see. Um, all right. I'm just going to go down a couple numbers here. I think we have what about approximately 8, maybe 12 million Jehovah Witnesses in the United States. We probably have another 8 million white evangelicals uh, whose uh, actually, even though they're white, they have a direct bearing on our community due to the collective nature of their voting. Um, and then you have the black conservatives that are more interested in the value of their property than there are human rights. So when you talk about collectively as a people, it seems to me, I mean, we can't do like the old tribes where we go and conquer and unite each other under one banner through conquest. Those days physically are over. But is there a way for us to conduct this warfare on an unconventional level, meaning as when you go back through the various dynasties, empires, whatever you want to call them, the levels of intrigue that are underneath. The not necessarily the ruler or the leader that you see out front, but the underpinnings, the underworkings. Uh, is there a way for us to network without all of the envy and prejudice intervening?
I think definitely there is a way to go about that. But again, that goes back to why I
How
talk
many?
about
How many of us are you willing to kill?
that ultimately ends up being the real question, because
Yes, it does.
yeah, when you talk about revolution, there is no such thing as a revolution that is not bloody, right? And then we can even talk about the birth, us being birthed coming into this world. There's bloodshed, from the moment you're born. But what I was going to get into is just a psychological factor in regards to this. So the deal is again, it goes back to the baggage that we carry as a people. And when we carry a lot of baggage, then we don't even recognize when we're attacking each other, and we don't even recognize the value of having a community uh, outlook. Again, most people are driven based upon individual gains. And that's how we live our life, through individual opportunities. And society has geared us that way. And by society gearing us that way, what you're talking about is you're talking about a population, not just black, but a population that is brought up on individual development and growth and wealth, in running that rat race. The difference is when you talk about a people who are basically operating from um, a position of being in charge, a position of being um, not being oppressed, operating as an individual, versus a person that is operating without their culture intact, without their way of life intact, and without having a solid foundation intact, operating as an individual. You get two totally different uh, views and takes in operations. So if I am a white male, and I'm gonna have a certain form of privilege built in how I operate, in a sense of entitlement, should I say. Certain things I'm going to expect. And by expecting those things, those are going to put me in a position where I'm going to go for it. And nothing is going to get in my way. And I'm going to have that mentality. Whereas if you come from the average black male who has the position that I'm subject to get shot. I'm subject to get put in jail. I'm subject to be outcast. I'm subject to be, uh, frowned upon. I'm subject to lose my job for just speaking up. You got all of these negatives going against you, but by having that same dominant characteristic that the white male counterpart has. And so the playing field is not even. So when you go into it as an individual within an environment to where you are viewed as inferior, then you're not going to have the same results. That's why that individualism won't work for us, whereas it can work for them. Because again, when you talk about the people that are in charge versus the people that are at the bottom, it's a very different outlook. So we can't do things the same way they do. We can't view things the same way they view. We have to be able to recognize that we are fighting from a different position, a different place on the board. But again, this all goes back to a person's perception. And if you're not a student of history and talking about the children from the age, going to the fourth grade to the ninth grade, if they hadn't saw characteristics within their own household that causes them to be proud of the family name and the family values that they've been brought up to have, then what's left? Typically what gets shoved on them goes right back to what we started off the conversation with, and that's religion. So even as a youth, they're looking forward to the pie in the sky. So you're not even teaching them to be strong physical beings that recognize that they should have the ability to go out and get it, because it's what's needed to be done for the family, for the community, and for the people. It's not ingrained in it. So they don't have any role models at this point. The role models have now shifted to people that don't look like them, shifted to environments that don't look like theirs, shifted to just fictitious dreams and goals that don't employ personal value and critical value that builds a community. These things are just like night and day. They don't even exist today. And so if it don't exist, how do you expect them to to even start working from a position of solutions when there's none that's being brought to them? That's not the upbringing that they're being raised in, and so they don't have that critical thinking value placed in them. And then, like I said, James, if it comes to a point to where their eyes waking up by the time they're in their 20s and 30s, now they within the minority within the minority.
So true. So true. Um, Brother Williams, let's cut it off here, and we'll resume our discussion next week. Uh, you just had an orientation. When was it last? On the second?
Yes, sir. We had an orientation, but we're going to actually do another one. We're going to do a community day actually on October the 16th at the Martin Luther King Park. Um, it was a 6401 Skyline Drive. It's on a Saturday. In recognition to the founding of the Black Panther Party. It's going to be out there building with the community, and as well as provide information and input on how to join the Panther Party. And we're looking to try to get a few other grassroots organizations there so that the people have various groups that they can turn to as far as getting involved in the community. So we want to just let this be a community day for people to have exposure to various different organizations or different um, groups that are doing work in the community, and also uh, orientation slash meeting the Panther Party, and we're expecting to start a new recruitment cycle probably toward the end of the month. But right now we're just guiding up people that are interested in making that step.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brother Williams. Looking forward. Make sure you bring some of your young people on. Always good to talk to Brother Karan, and who was the young lady,
Humble
uh,
B.
Humblebee. Yes, sir. So it's always glad to me to be able to interact with the youth.
Gotcha.
Why don't you give us your final thoughts for the evening? Make sure we get all the information about the party.
Yes, again, we're going to be hosting a community event October the 16th from 1 to 5 p.m. at the Martin Luther King Jr. Park. Um, and we want people to come out, learn a little bit more about the Panther Party, learn a little bit more about other organizations and grassroots people that are out there making a difference in your community. We also are hosting an event November the 13th and 14th at the Imperial Barbershop, to where we're doing a career exposure day, looking to reach the youth at the ages of schooling 4th grade to 9th grade to try to give them exposure to certain career paths that will hopefully move them in directions that would help them want to be active and involved in careers that will empower our people and empower the community. And it's I just believe our people should be students of history at all times. We have to come up out uh, of the laziness. We have to come up out of just getting glued to videos and employ actual studious paths so that we can build ourselves up to be able to participate in the larger collective operation. You know, it takes a lot of work to be consistent and to be on the path of being a freedom fighter. And just having the willingness to do so, but not having that strength and that determination and that discipline is something that you have to prepare yourself for no matter what. Nothing comes easy, and so we have to be willing to make those steps to deal with the hard work that's before us and embrace it and love it. So with that, I just want to say all power to the people.
Thank you so much, Brother Williams, as always, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Yes, sir.
You have a great weekend. Once again, our show comes to an end. We hope that we have given you some things to think about, and join us next week as as we talk to different people concerning the role of the Black church in the community. Have a good night, and we look forward to talking to you next Monday.